Hi, I'm Jameson, and today we're going to look into the genocide in Darfur, the first genocide to happen in the 2000s and the only one to happen so far. The genocide was orchestrated and carried out by this man, Omar al-Bashir. Let's first take a look at the actual genocide itself, and then we'll look into the specific crimes of al-Bashir.
Sudan, the largest country in Africa, lies where the Sahara Desert meets the grasslands of the Sahel. Since its independence in 1956, civil wars between Sudan's north and south have killed millions and displaced millions more. Now a new conflict has emerged in its westernmost region, called Darfur. Nearly the size of France, this vast region has been neglected for years by the government. The region is inhabited by many tribes that are racially and culturally intertwined. But despite these cultural similarities, groups of farmers who are viewed as African and groups of herders who are considered Arab have had clashes over the land for decades. Droughts, famines, desertification, and population pressures have added to the rising tensions. Since 2003, rebel groups have fought against the government, accusing it of supporting the Arab herders over the African farmers. The government's response caused a mass exodus, forcing villagers to become refugees in their own homeland. In this United Nations refugee camp along the Chad-Sudan border, the women and children here seek asylum from the Janjaweed, the armed militias of Arab herders organized by the government to fight the rebels and kill civilians. Entire villages have been burned, hundreds of thousands have died. Beatings, rapes, and mutilations are used as weapons of terror. Around 2 million people, almost a third of Darfur's population, have fled their villages.
Darfur has a population of around 9 million people, and 300,000 people died, almost 4% of the population. Al-Bashir was a dictator, and he had total control over the country's military as well as all of its resources, and he systematically targeted Africans who were non-Muslims inside of Darfur.
The government began to take guns to distribute guns to Arab people in order to come to display or to kill the black people. So then happens very more classes. First happen with robbery. When you move it from place to another, you will suddenly find the people, the robbery, they will kill you and to receive all your passengers or all your tourists which you have. Then after that began to burn the areas. Villages and areas, every village or the village where the people live or where the black people live, they began to burn. And government, it is still began to move with these cars to attack the villages. And then, so burn us and kill us, and we say this is cannot come. We can see the place where can protect us. We displace it to some of them, to Arab commies, some of them become in charge. I was going with my sister one day before I leave it, Darfur. We were going and the government, so suddenly we found a government, they raped my sister in front of me. Then the tears come in our eyes. And the other one said, "What are you to cry? What are you to, why are you worried?" Then he also came to me and began also to rape the man. Then the other said, no.
Some Janjaweed militia have been formed by the Sudanese government from Sudan, and that's from Darfur and from the neighboring countries such as Chad, Central Africa, so as to fight on behalf of the government. And they start targeting the civilian and killing them. So they came in the morning, attacked the village, killed the men, raped the women, looting the properties, burned the villages, poison the water. They even killed animals like donkeys, horses, all those things. They killed them.
Al-Bashir and the Sudanese government formed a military coalition that systematically went around and targeted villages within Darfur and killed everyone within the villages. Those that survived were expelled from their homes and became refugees. Al-Bashir also targeted anyone within inside the country that tried to bring attention to these human rights violations.
First time they arrested me in Jalinji, I spent 4 months there. And the other time they arrested me in Khartoum, I spent 7 months there. And it was terrible. It was terrible because they don't like this work of human rights, and if you are Sudanese and you are working in this human right and you have been detained, so that is completely different story. So imagine a person being in a very small cellar for 7 months. In daily basis they humiliated, beaten, keeping you without food, without water, without having access to get outside of the room. Just you remain in this small cellar. So it is different. It is different. See, in Darfur, we expect that at any time you have been shot, because this is something normal to hear that someone moving in the street and have been killed. Someone they attack him in the house at night and they killed him. So this is normal.
So this genocide began in February of 2003, and it wasn't until February of 2009 that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, finally took notice and brought charges against al-Bashir.
Certainly, it's a momentous day for the International Criminal Court, and more broadly, the cause of justice and ending impunity for the most serious crimes under law. The mass murder of civilians, the use of rape as a weapon of intimidation or war, the forcible displacement of whole populations on the basis of their ethnicity. With this warrant, the International Criminal Court has essentially put out a wanted poster for President Omar al-Bashir of Sudan and has linked him on the basis of the evidence provided by the prosecutor of the court to widespread and systematic crimes committed against the people of Darfur. Just formally, murder, extermination, forcible transfer, torture, and rape. Those are the 5 counts of crimes against humanity contained in Article 7 of the Rome Statute of the ICC. The judges also found reasonable basis to believe Omar al-Bashir was implicated in 2 counts of war crimes, intentionally directing attacks against civilian population and pillage.
So al-Bashir was charged with 5 crimes against humanity and 2 war crimes. Very serious stuff. If he was extradited to Hague, where the ICC's courts are, he would face the death penalty. Obviously very, very serious. Let's see how he responded.
Sudan's president is on a charm offensive, and that might seem a little strange, seeing as he has just been accused of genocide. President Omar al-Bashir, who has ruled one of Africa's most expansive countries for 19 years and has been blamed for being the mastermind of the massacres in the country's war-ravaged Darfur region, essentially went on tour in Darfur on Wednesday.
In typical dictator fashion, he could not have cared less. As a result, Sudan remained in a perpetual state of conflict. If you look at Sudan's economy, their GDP, a measurement of an economy, it's only 65 billion, 30 times smaller than the US. And when an economy that is already struggling is constantly at war, it's a recipe for disaster.
Sudan is facing difficult times. No one knows this more than Khartoum's hordes of skilled laborers. Armed with their tools, carpenters, plumbers, masons and porters gather here every morning and wait for clients. Most will live here empty-handed.
Getting work has become difficult. I can't even rent a house for my family here. I had to move them to the village. Life is very difficult for us.
Inflation rose last year, reaching 44% by December, with much of the rise coming from basic food items such as meat, fruit and milk. As the prices of goods continue to increase, many people are finding it harder and harder to make ends meet. According to the UN Famine Early Warning System, more than 3.5 million Sudanese do not have enough to eat.
So the entire country is struggling. There's millions of people who cannot find food. And as Wikileaks will show, al-Bashir funneled $9 billion out of the country, over 10% of the country's GDP. A lot of the money that was funneled out of the country came from South Sudan. However, in 2011, South Sudan seceded from Sudan as a result of the leadership of al-Bashir. South Sudan is a very strategic part of Sudan because it holds many of their natural resources. As a result of them leaving, what was left of Sudan was thrown into even more economic turmoil.
Sudan's economy has been limping since the south of the country seceded in 2011, taking with it 3/4 of its oil output. Bread shortages have hit the country, with wheat traders blaming a foreign currency crisis for shortages of the staple that have left people queuing for hours outside bakeries. The situation was further worsened when the Sudanese pound was devalued, making it hard to import essential supplies such as wheat.
So al-Bashir carried out a genocide, stole $9 billion, forced the south part of Sudan to secede because of his actions, and threw the country into economic turmoil. But despite all of this, he was re-elected president in 2015 in an election that definitely wasn't rigged. With his overwhelming support, will al-Bashir be able to save the economy?
The economic situation used to be good and the purchasing power people had was reasonable. But conditions are bad now, the goods are expensive and so people cannot afford them. According to the State Statistical Agency, inflation rose to 68.93% in November from 86.44% in October. It has increased constantly despite government attempts to contain the hike in prices by strictly limiting cash withdrawals. The living conditions in Sudan are deteriorating. We have queues everywhere for fuel and at the ATMs. You can't even pull out your money from the bank. You can't get your salary. Everything has become very expensive and we don't even know what is happening. It feels like there is a ticking bomb and we don't know when it would explode.
It took over 3 years, but eventually, in December of 2018, that bomb did explode.
This was in the capital Khartoum, but for the last 10 days, protests have erupted across the country. Demonstrations first broke out in the provincial city of Atbara, triggered by the rising cost of fuel and food. But the people soon turned on symbols of the ruling party and dictatorial President Omar al-Bashir, who's held power for 30 years. And there were unprecedented scenes when President Bashir's motorcade, with him inside it, was openly jeered by crowds of Sudanese who seemed to have lost all fear. The response from the state has been predictably brutal. The police, intelligence agencies, and the army have all been in action, bringing with them beatings, mass arrests, tear gassing, live ammunition, and multiple casualties. Up to 40 people are thought to have died. And the state is now deploying a full spectrum of repression, including groups that have been described as death squads. President Bashir himself remained defiant. On Christmas Day, he appeared on state TV denouncing the demonstrators as foreign stooges and infidels.
In line with the previous 30 years of his rule, al-Bashir employed death squads to try to silence citizens within his country. Despite that, protests continued for 5 months.
This out of Sudan. After 30 years in power, President Omar al-Bashir has been forced out of power by the country's military. The army has dissolved the government and declared a state of emergency. Military sources say it all started before dawn on Thursday morning. Al-Bashir was told by security chiefs that there was no alternative but to step down, and he went quietly. A journalist in the capital, Khartoum, captured this video reporting that thousands of people were marching toward the military headquarters, chanting, "He is a coward and he has fallen." Now, this all comes after months of deadly anti-government protests demanding an end to al-Bashir's long rule. We're going to bring you more on this story later on the show. But CNN's Nema Al-Bagir, she is joining us now from New York. And Nema, it's happened. After 30 years in power, Bashir has stepped down. Tell us more about what brought about his removal from power.
What's truly extraordinary is that the majority of Sudan's population is actually under 30. So this is his generation. This is the generation that grew up under Omar al-Bashir's dictatorship, that didn't actually know democracy or freedom of expression or freedom of movement. And yet this is the generation that has brought about his downfall.
So al-Bashir was finally removed from power, but the evidence of his crimes did not stop. 9 days after he was removed from power, security forces found 130 million when they searched his home. So the man behind the first genocide of the 2000s is finally out of power. However, he still hasn't been held responsible for any of his crimes. When I was in college, I visited Dachau, a concentration camp in Germany. As you leave that concentration camp, there's a sign that in 5 languages says "never again," in reference to genocides never occurring again. Our tour guide stopped at that sign and talked about how that sign upset her because genocides still happen, and there's a sign sitting there that's saying they're never going to let it happen again. The only way that these genocides will stop happening is if we as a society hold the people responsible who carried them out. And that's why I think it's vital that Omar al-Bashir is brought before the ICC and tried for his crimes against humanity. Only time will tell if this does actually happen, but let me know your thoughts below about whether you think Omar al-Bashir will be brought before the ICC. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.